Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel True Crime and Trials, where I discuss true crime and trials. My name's Lindsay and we are on to the next witness in the Durst trial. Now this is quite a long one, so I suggest you buckle up, grab a cuppa and just sit and listen, because it is a long one, but it gets so interesting the further on. I mean, I had to keep pausing this testimony because I was like, oh my God, what on earth was going on? So I will try and get through it as quick as possible, but honestly, it's just bizarre. So we have Detective Michael Struk. So this is a video, recorded video testimony, and it's the defence that goes first. So he retired in 1985 and then he went on to work as a private investigator. He says he did his absolute best in the investigation because there's a headline that he reads out and it quoted him saying, "The jinx made me look like an idiot." Which he did say because, you know, obviously he saw the jinx and thought, well, that's not right, they're making me look like a total idiot. He did give 2 lengthy interviews to the producers of Jinx. He said they made him look like an idiot because nobody knew what the police did in the case. So the editing of that series didn't reflect that, thus him saying what he said. I beg to differ, because the further on in this video you go, I think he is an idiot. So Friday 5th of February at 4:30 p.m, Mr Durst came to the detective squad and he remembers that he was the only one in that day, and he says that when Bob came in he had a dog with him. He then says that he probably said something like, "Who are you and how the hell did you get up here?" because he had the dog with him, and normally they have people that announce someone that's coming up, but Detective Struk did take a report from him. After he took the report from Bob, he then looked at what had been done so far in this investigation, and he saw there had been a telephone interview with Jean Cook, then an interview with Larry Cohen, who was a fellow student, an interview with Anne McCormack, Kathy's mother. He then made several phone calls himself to the New York State Police and spoke with James and Sergeant Kidney. He found out from James that he had made a warrantless search of the Durst home and that he had entered the house, although James had only made observations, and that he didn't see anything remarkable or anything that was in disarray or anything that would indicate a crime scene or being worthy of a crime scene unit response. James said that the police seemed to be in order. When asked about Gilberta, he says she was very aggressive in her demands about what the police should be doing, and he knew of her breaking into the Durst home. Now he talks of when Gilberta and another trooper got to the Durst house and conducted a walkthrough together. He says they didn't see anything that suggested foul play, and he was satisfied with that. Didn't fancy going and checking it himself, you know. Along with Gilberta and her friends wanting the police to do more, there was another team, as De Guerin puts it, consisting of Kathy's sister Mary and her friend Geraldine, who were also nagging at the police to do more. Right, obviously Michael interviewed Albert Cooperman, and he reads an excerpt from his log that he reads, that reads, "Last Monday at some time between 9 and 11 a.m, sounded distressed, distraught, problems with neurology, having difficulty making it up, headaches, diarrhea, cramps, does not know where she called from, disturbed about having to make up time that she doesn't have to, history of mental distress, Dr. David Kaufman, neurology." There is also mention of him saying in his log that there may have been an interruption by a signal from a payphone. So now they read an excerpt from Michael's notes from the interview with Dr. David Kaufman, who was the course director, and it reads, "Kathy Durst missed many classes dating back approximately a year and a half. Think it was about time her marriage was starting to fail. giving absurd excuses for her absences, such as car broke down 2 to 3 days, also missed an entire week, failed the July 1981 cycle clerkship in neurology, was under stress and was disturbed regarding having to repeat missed classes. So Gilberta and Geraldine went into the penthouse in New York and found jewellery of Kathy's that she normally wears. Allegedly, she had left South Salem wearing that jewellery and now it was found in New York. So according to De Guerin, this means that Kathy actually made it to New York, which Michael agrees with. Yeah, but then Bob could have planted it there. He absolutely believes that he did his absolute best to solve this mystery. He thinks they did whatever they could have done. Okay, so now we move on to the petition lawsuit brought against the police, and it's being brought about by Abrams law firm, and Mr. Abrams is sat in the court while this testimony was being done, and in this lawsuit it insults Michael, which he doesn't think is fair. And in one of the sections, it is titled, New York PD's Failure to Investigate the Murder of Kathy. De Guerin then asks Michael if he feels like he failed, and he says that if this wasn't such a serious topic, he would laugh. Also in this petition, it quotes Janine Pirro, the woman who got the case reopened. The way he feels about Janine is that she is a camera whore. One of the quotes says the investigation was either unethical, corrupt or incompetent, maybe all three, and Michael's comment on this is look at the source. The next quote says either a real cop investigated a real crime and blew it, or someone above him pulled the plug on it and didn't care that a real woman was gone. Michael comments that this is ridiculous. Another comment regarding Gilberta and her friends reads, we are providing the NYPD with hard evidence of Robert's suspicious activities in the aftermath of his wife's disappearance. They ignored it. The question is why? Michael simply says, what hard evidence? What crime scene? What dead body? It explains itself. He explains that he knew from their hearts that they had their views on what they thought may have took place, but he says that a major step away from what is reality and what is something that we in a police agency are able to investigate within the guidelines and procedures that are set by the court. So he's saying, even though he's getting pushed by Gilberta and Mary, there's only so much he could do. So the next quote says, I was actually stunned and horrified by Struk's work on the case. Struk seemed determined to ignore vital evidence. I was convinced he had marching orders or was so prejudiced against women that he didn't give a damn that someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's friend was missing. Again, Michael says he doesn't want to laugh in court and he thinks it's absurd. Another says, unlike most of the cold cases I had investigated so far though, I was stunned by how little we had to work with from the initial investigation. A murder investigation in my county would produce a full box, a stack of files as heavy and as thick as a few phone books. The NYPD box on Kathy was light, the file itself amazingly narrow. And the final quote says that an NYPD detective and a lieutenant could do so little and draw such conclusions based on information provided by Robert Durst's spokesperson and employers of the Dursts was reflective of a society that felt women were disposable. So now we move on to the state, and this is where the bulk of the testimony is. I mean, bearing in mind this was an 8-hour testimony. I'm not sure if they've finished it because they stopped and then they've gone on to other witnesses. So I'm doing this video, whether or not they're going to come back to his testimony, I don't know, or if this is it. So this was Michael's first nobody homicide case, and when this case came in, he didn't have any active case ongoing at the time. After this case, he didn't handle any more homicide cases, and then he became involved in media, TV and technical advising, and this was a few years after he had retired. He worked with Law and Order, helping with police matters for the show. So Mr. Lewin states that when the defence had Michael read out some of his reports, they only picked certain ones. So there is information in those reports that could be viewed as incriminating towards Bob. So remember when it was said back in his testimony with the defence that Michael remembers the time Bob came into the PD because he walked in with the dog? Well, now he not only had the dog, but he had a magazine with him. But Michael says at first he didn't remember Mr. Lewin didn't remember, but Mr. Lewin shows him evidence. Michael says he doesn't really remember and wasn't sure if Bob with the magazine was trying to impress him. So I'm guessing at this point it might have been a magazine with the Durst family on the front. Neither does he specifically remember Bob telling him his father was Seymour Durst, but again he says it wasn't impressive. So we find out it was the New York Post magazine, I'm not sure, and it is titled The Men Who Own New York. So as I was saying, it was this magazine, and now he's thinking about it. He remembers thinking it was tacky and it meant nothing to him. The name meant nothing to him. He later did find out who they were. So in the missing persons report, Michael had written slight stomach. Now he can't remember the person he wrote this about, because under that section you write something. So it's like he wrote it in the place where you'd write any significant things like tattoos and piercings, but he put slight stomach under that section. And he says it would have been something that Bob had told him, and so he guesses at this point and thinks it maybe means she had a pot belly or was pregnant. So now Mr. Lewin brings up something called the itinerary, which says Monday 10 a.m. Ridgefield, Connecticut, 4 o'clock something about hate, hate? I don't know what I've wrote there. 5 o'clock office, 7 o'clock film or whatever. Tuesday 2 a.m. South Salem. 7 a.m. leave house. Third entry says drive. 8 garage. 8 apartment Oscar Mail. And Wednesday 10 a.m. This was given to Michael by Gilberta as something Bob had done, saying it was recovered by the cleaning lady from Bob's house and it was given to Gilberta. We do find out about that later on. Michael believed just before he retired that it was certainly reasonable to believe that Bob had something to do with Kathy's disappearance. He also says that for him there was no indication that Kathy had intentionally, voluntarily absented herself. There was no other suspect they were looking at other than Bob. He believes that it would be hard to believe any other person was responsible for Kathy's disappearance and death, and he thought that from very early on. So when Michael interviewed Albert Cooperman, he didn't ask him if that was definitely Kathy's voice he heard on the phone. If he had and Cooperman wasn't sure, then it would have changed the direction of the investigation and they may have concentrated more on the house in South Salem because Kathy maybe didn't make it to New York after all. Duh! So there was a show called Vanished on ABC that Michael spoke to. And while being interviewed for this, it was suggested that Susan Berman may have made the call to the Dean, and Michael said, "I won't go there." Then Mr. Lewin rightly goes at Michael for not searching the South Salem house, knowing Bob had lied from the start, and with Michael having pretty quick suspicions about Bob. He was a suspect in his eyes, so why on earth didn't he search the house? I just do not understand that. And at this point I was starting to feel a bit bad for Michael. I mean, Mr. Lewin is being relentless and pulling apart his whole entire investigation, but as it goes on I can bloody well understand it, because his behaviour and his lack of investigative work is a shambles and disgusting. Even though Bob had pinned Bob as a suspect and Gilberta was telling Michael that Kathy had never got on a train from South Salem back to Manhattan, he still didn't investigate it based on what Gilberta had told him alone, he still didn't investigate that because Gilberta was a civilian. That doesn't give him the kick up the arse he needed, then nothing would. In his words, they could not go chasing another red herring when he believed that Kathy was in the city. He was not letting go of that idea that Kathy had made it to New York, even though quite a few people had told him otherwise. Even though he believed Bob had something to do with Kathy's disappearance very soon after Bob had reported Kathy missing. He had no crime scene or no body, so why? But to us mortals, why we're thinking, well, hang on, he said one person said she was at the South Salem home, then he put her on a train. 5, 6, 7 people have said no, she didn't make it back there. She was last seen in the South Salem house. Bob was the last to see her, but they still didn't search it. I mean, come on. So, but he's also relying on when James Harney entered the South Salem house and saw nothing suspicious, even though a proper search wasn't done. It was a tactical choice not to ask Bob for consent to search the house that night. At the time, he believed Kathy was in the city, so he didn't find it pertinent to go to the train station and speak to the employees or pass a picture around. Why? Why? That at least. I mean, Now Michael is shown a note that he recognises, and he is told it is known as the dig note, which shows, which says town dump, bridge, dig, boat, other, shovel, check car, truck, rentals. This note was found in the trash by Mary, Geraldine and Gilberta at the South Salem house. Michael assumes he was told about this during the original investigation. He is asked if it could be interpreted of a list of how to get rid of a body, and he says yes. He still didn't search that house. One of the theories Michael had at the time was that Bob had taken Kathy's body and he had driven it down to the Pine Barrens and discarded it. This was based on a call being traced to a phone box outside a laundromat there. So the phone records Michael had, he gave to Mary and Geraldine because they were chasing the phone numbers down. Apparently his boss was okay with this because it was a lengthy process. He is then asked if he gave Mary and Geraldine copies of the records from the Durst organisation, the Durst apartment and the house in South Salem, which he doesn't recall. Can you see why this investigation is an utter sham? Outsourcing to civilians, the ones that he didn't believe enough to go search the South Salem home, he's now passing on phone records for them to check. He then gives his explanation as to why he did this, why he gave the phone records to them, and he says it because the case was getting colder and he knew his boss's philosophy was that whatever it takes to help this case get going again, then he would do it. So at that point it didn't seem to be an issue to ask people for help. Utterly bizarre. I mean, now he's asked if he found a Burberry coat in the Riverside Drive apartment, but he says it wasn't found, it was observed. So it wasn't found, it was seen in the apartment. He thought at the time, with it being an expensive coat, why it would look like it had been in the washing machine, like it was dry clean only. That's what made him connect that to the call from the laundromat. They didn't collect the coat because of the fact it had been through the washing machine and there was no such thing as DNA back then, so it was just contents that were noted. And this was a man's coat, by the way, so Mr. Lewin does point out that although there wasn't DNA testing back then, there was blood typing, so another mistake was made there. Michael is now asked if he learned of who Bob's close friends were, and he says Susan Berman, Prudence Farrow and Doug Oliver. Mr. Lewin mentions someone called Nick Shavin, but Michael can't recall that name. He became aware that Susan was a very close friend of Bob's. Even though eventually he did believe that Kathy didn't make that call to the Dean, he didn't think to suspect Susan of doing it. Now we move on to someone called Matt Brickbeck, who wrote a book, and Michael gave him the entire materials he had on this case. He doesn't think he was given any money for it. Right, okay. Mr. Lewin says that isn't it true that you spent more time talking to Matt Birkbeck about your investigation than you actually did put into the original investigation? Michael says he doesn't know that to be fact. Michael also did a court TV documentary on the 10th of February 2002. He doesn't think he got paid for that either. He did another documentary in 2001 and he can't remember if he got paid for that. His only comeback that he keeps saying is that he thinks it was important that he did anything he could to bring the case back to light to help it get solved. He probably got paid. Moving on to another friend of Kathy's called Ellen Strauss. So Mr. Lewin says that at some point in the investigation, Michael went to a party at Ellen's house, and Michael says they were invited to hopefully gain some intelligence or information. Fair enough. But he spent the night there on the couch. He doesn't see a problem with that. And he can't remember if he'd been drinking or not. I mean, what? He goes to a witness's house for, intelligence or information and doesn't make it home. He ends up spending the night there. So Michael made a statement back in 2003 where he said if he'd have known that Kathy was going home to confront Bob, it would have changed the focus of his probe. Which you would be surprised to learn he doesn't remember if he knew that or not. He doesn't know who said it or when it was said. Can you see now why this investigation was an utter disgrace? He recalls being told that when Kathy was at Gilberta's the day she disappeared, she was arguing with Bob over the phone. So basically, he knew damn well that she was upset and angry at the time. So he remembers possibly that Gilberta told him Kathy was angry and going home to confront Bob. Michael says that his boss wanted them to get Bob to think they were asleep at the wheel to avoid Bob lawyering up, which is fine. But, he wanted Bob to think, not actually be asleep on the job, at the wheel. There's two differences, making Bob think and actually doing something, or making Bob think that you were asleep at the wheel when you were actually asleep at the wheel. So, here we go. Mr. Lewin now talks of someone called Eleanor Schwank, who Michael did not interview. She gave a damaging interview to the New York Post in June of 1982 where she mentions a horrific beating and request for hospitalisation of Kathy. I'll read that again. This woman, Eleanor Schwank, gave a damaging interview to the New York Post in June of 1982 where she mentions a horrific beating and a request for hospitalisation of Kathy. Michael did not do anything about this. He doesn't remember it or if he was on the case at the time. It was in June 1982. Right, here we go. Buckle up, people. Michael had sexual relations with a witness during this investigation. So he explains the whole thing. No names are mentioned, so we don't know who this was with. He says that he was contacted by one of these people and asked whether he would join them. He believes it was the next day to look at the premises of where one of them had lived and to see if this was of any relevance to the case. He was asked to come at the end of the day to accommodate their work schedule and his. He went there, and upon entering, the one individual that he had sex with told the other one something like, "Don't you have something to do?" So she sent the other one off. The person left, and the person he had sex with initiated something that he went along with, which was oral sex. He said to her before he orgasmed, would she be okay if he did that, or would she like them to finish in the conventional way? So they then moved on to the floor where they had intercourse. He agrees that this is about as unprofessional as you can get. At this point, I was actually like, what the actual fuck? Just wow. Did he know he was, what was going on before he went there? I mean, he didn't seem to fight it. He didn't seem surprised by it. And he goes there and gets a blowjob, has sex, and, there you go. So it was decided by the boss at the time not to declare Bob a full-blown suspect because they had no crime scene or body. And they just thought, let's just hope something falls into place. Maybe if they'd have done a wee bit more investigating, they'd have had a bit more. Bob had told Michael at the time that Kathy was failing at medical school and that's why she took off, which according to her medical school report she was doing very well and was on track to graduate, which we know. But he didn't examine those records. He says he wishes he did, but doesn't think it was a mistake on his part. He didn't even know where she was supposed to be the Monday morning after she disappeared. What were they doing? Bob told them that Kathy was working in-house at the hospital for her rotation, which meant she was there and she was staying overnight, which was a lie. Guess what, people? Michael didn't check this out either. Nor did he speak to anyone that was at Gilberta's when Kathy had turned up and had the argument on the phone, which was the beginning of Kathy's disappearance. So that's part of the timeline. So my thoughts with this is that considering how many interviews he gave and information he gave to people about this case in the hope of bringing this case to light and to hopefully one day getting it solved, listening to this testimony he doesn't remember much at all, which doesn't make sense when all he wanted to do was keep this case going and get it solved. You'd think he'd remember it. Well, I'm not saying he'd remember every detail, but some of these details you would remember. With regards to the domestic violence, Michael is quoted with saying to Kathy's friends, it's not fact. You can't just run off and indict somebody because there's been a push or a slap or a punch or a bad relationship. This he remembers saying sort of. And by the sounds of it, they didn't really investigate the domestic violence aspect of it either. He also didn't interview the doctor that treated Kathy the day she went with her black eye. Bob told Michael that on Tuesday, 2nd of February 1982, he was in Connecticut looking at land and buildings. He didn't ask Bob for any more information about it. But he did tell one of the producers for the Jinx or the movie that I guess looking back on it today, I should have held his foot to the fire of which parcels. I had to look that up, which means plots of land he looked at. Another mistake. Hindsight is a wonderful thing, isn't it? Michael didn't even check to make sure that's where Bob was that day, but he says that he would have probably gone against their strategy with regards to Bob because they didn't want him thinking that they were on his case. So, just don't investigate anything. It's just easier that way. In fact, Michael had said that finding out Bob had been in Connecticut on that day, that he thought it was starting to fall into place. So, just sat there drinking coffee, waiting for all these pieces to fall into place. So Bob had told him that on the 1st of February he had taken his dog to the vet. This wasn't followed up on either. Bearing in mind this was the morning after Kathy had disappeared. So, you know, just didn't think to check it out. And, you know, seeing as he was saying it was his alibi. So that's it. Not sure if that's his full testimony, but that's as far as they got with it. I mean, wow. What an absolutely poorly executed investigation. Absolutely disgusting. I'm just shocked. Absolutely shocked. So, there we go. Digest on that at your leisure. So, I'll be back with more in the next video. So, until then, bye for now.